All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Johan Matthews, a member of the learning team at the Cooperative Fund of Northeast, and I'd love to welcome you to session 3 of our 3-part mini course on Co-op Curious, called Co-op Curious. This is an opportunity for you to learn about co-op ownership and governance. And I hope if you have any questions, you can drop it at the end, but maybe you'll be able to get some answered along the way. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Today's program is brought to you by the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. We're a 50-plus-year-old nonprofit community development financial institution that believes that cooperatives can help us get economic justice for all. So some of you may know, some of you may not. We typically provide co-op-friendly financial products such as loans, and we also provide co-op business coaching through our learning team. We also provide educational content like this, and if you are trying to connect to the co-op community, we can be of assistance there. We also serve as an investment opportunity that promotes socially conscious enterprise if you've got some dollars and you'd love to invest. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the learning team. My role is the ecosystem strategy manager. We've got a few other members of the team here. We've got Carolyn, our program director, who'll be joining us as a speaker today. We've also got Maggie and Carla, who is supporting this call, tech and other issues. If you got an issue, drop it in the chat. One of them can support you. So we've got the whole team, and we're here to help. Right? Since 2019, we've been providing no-cost business support to co-ops and co-op curious entrepreneurs. So if you are trying to get some support, no matter your stage of growth, we can help you understand your goals and your next step. So you can find us online at coopfund.coop/coaching. This course, this is
Hey,
the third
Johan,
session. Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. Do you mean to be screen sharing right now?
Yeah,
Okay, awesome.
excellent. Yeah. So we've got so the screen is being shared, correct? Yes, excellent. So this is this course we've had going on. We've been having this course go on since April of this year. This is our third session, and we've had office hours for folks who needed it, who wanted follow-up support on the content. But even as the course ends today, you can still reach out to us for some one-on-one support through coaching, as I just mentioned. The office hours aren't going to continue after the course, but the coaching will. And if you are ever interested in being connected to other co-op service providers and peers, definitely reach out. Okay. So as I mentioned, we've had 2 other sessions: design your co-op, manage your co-op. Now it's time to govern your co-op. And today's session will be recorded. We'll send it out to you if you want the resource to just review, or maybe you missed this session or last one, you will get that recording. And if you want to stay off camera, if you're worried about being recorded, we're going to be mostly sharing, so you won't be captured, but feel free to stay off camera if that's important to you. All right. So today, what can you expect? We're going to touch a bit on co-op ownership and governance. What do we mean by this? How do we cultivate these things? And how might governance ultimately empower ownership? Excellent. So I want to start with this quote and a story. The quote is, "The true power of governance lies not in its ability to restrict, but in its capacity to empower." And something that I saw, that I heard a story that illustrates this, is this. A few scientists, they were looking to study fleas. Not sure why, you gotta ask them, but they were curious. And so they decided to capture some fleas, put them in a jar, and the fleas kept leaping out, right? They had the capacity to leap beyond the lid of this jar. So the scientists covered the jar with a lid, and pretty soon the fleas are jumping, bumping their heads, and learning, well, we're trapped here. We're going to leap beneath the lid. So that's what they did. And this carried on for some time until the fleas learn their lesson that they can't leap beyond this lid. And then something peculiar happened. Even when the scientists removed the lid, the fleas kept jumping to just beneath the lid, right? They couldn't leap beyond it, even though they had the capacity. And so, what's even stranger is that when those fleas passed on their genetics to the next generation, the future descendants of those fleas also couldn't leap beyond the lid, right? They maintained that memory of pain and they continue to maintain a less than their full capacity and could not leap beyond the lid. And this is what happens sometimes when we think of governance, right? We think of governance as rules and restrictions that stop you from doing things, and it's passed on from generation to generation. And it's something that we need to think clearly about because as we build co-ops, whether we're building it from scratch or we're converting an existing company, we're creating a sense of limitlessness or limitation through the governance structures that we set up. And we want to think about how that is transmitted over time. So there's a lot to this, but we're going to dive in. Okay. One of the tools you can use to design a governance system that empowers your members rather than limits them is a ownership model canvas. This is a tool developed by Start.coop. It's a great tool in the co-op world. It's got 8 questions that you answer that you can use to discuss what goes into your bylaws ultimately. But even before then, it is a great tool for socializing these concepts with your current or future members, right? It's a great space for everyone to see everything on one piece of paper, on a sheet or on a screen, and talk through what are the different elements of ownership and governance in our co-op, and how do we design it so that we're not restricting ourselves, so that we are empowering ourselves. So the first is the purpose, right? What does your project, your co-op hope to achieve? Why does it exist? Right. And so that is a question that is essential, right? We've covered other tools such as the design your co-op tool to really dive into this. But even here, you bring that answer here, it's gonna have a very significant implication regarding the rest of the campus, right? If your co-op exists in your mind to create job security, right? Having the ability to control our hours and feel secure in my employment as a member owner, and someone is thinking of economic mobility, right? The ability to earn as much money as possible. That's going to create conflict because you guys, even though you want to create a co-op that you love, you're going to have very different orientations around certain decisions. So you need that purpose to be crystal clear and shared among members. Once you've got your purpose, now you're diving into stakeholders, right? Stakeholders are the folks who have a stake in the outcome of your co-op, right? They have a long-term interest, right? It's, driven from that old world, stake a claim. Colleagues of mine use the term heart holders, so feel free to shift it up if you like nonviolent language, right? Folks who care about this thing, right? Folks who are impacted, who have the wherewithal to care for this thing in the long term. So you're going to have stakeholders who are member owners, people who become owners of the co-op, members who are owners, and you're going to have non-owner stakeholders, right? Folks who are impacted by this or can influence you but aren't necessarily going to be member owners, right? Your customers and things like that. So if you're a worker cooperative, your stakeholders are going to be primarily the workers in the company. If you have a housing cooperative, your stakeholders are going to be primarily the residents in that housing structure. If you're a consumer cooperative, whether it's a food or a credit union or energy, it's going to be the people who buy from that cooperative, right? Who buy the food, who access the credit or the banking services, or who access the energy. Or even if you're a producer co-op, right, made up of individual producers or business owners, it's going to be those who produce goods and services for that co-op. So that's your initial member owners, and your non-owner stakeholders are also important to consider because they flow into the guidance system. In a traditional corporate environment, especially a mature one, the owners of the company are distinct from the operators of the company, and they're distinct from the customers of the company, right? So Walmart or any other corporation, you've got a class of folks who own the stock, right? They're the owners. They get the financial benefit of the company. Then they hire people, the operators, managers, all the way down to front staff, and they're the ones who run the company, operate it. And then you have the customers over here in some community buying. And right. And so those three stakeholders are disconnected. They don't see each other. And so they can make a lot of decisions that hurt each other, right? In a co-op, those three stakeholder groups are brought closer together. They can see, they can feel the impact, right? Because the members may be individuals who own that company, right? In a food co-op, for example, and they're the customers as well. So they shop there, they have an ownership stake, maybe they're even elected to the board. So they're much closer together and can make decisions that have a more positive impact on each other, right? Because they can see each other. They can elevate those stakeholder voices so that we have more input into the process, right? As a customer, as a worker, as a community member, as some other advisor. We can look at who our non-owner stakeholders are and give them a voice, right, in the cooperative environment. And that's a unique opportunity that you have to and to be able to cultivate in this space, right? So how do you elevate the voices of your non-owner stakeholders as well as your owner stakeholders? It's a great question, right? How many board seats might you give different stakeholder groups, right? Do they have a seat at all, right? Do we have a committee that gives us input? You can think about those things, and the stakeholders flow down into that. The next one is benefits, right? So what benefits do member owners get from being involved in this company, right? Whether it's employment benefits, retirement benefits, community benefits, right? Social ones, functional ones, economic ones. Thinking about what's in it for them, right? Because ultimately they're showing up to meet a personal need by cooperating with others. What are the what are the responsibilities or requirements of membership, right? What do folks have to give to be involved in this community, right? That's also essential. And these two things, the benefits and the responsibilities, they need to balance out, right? You cannot have benefits such as, well, you can, right? 75,000 a year, everyone starts there, 6 months vacation, right? Weekends off, and all you have to do is work a month, contribute $50, right? Eventually, those benefits are going to outweigh the responsibilities or what the responsibilities are contributing to the cooperative, and you're going to have an imbalance. Similarly, you can't have, oh, being a member, you're able to claim membership of our co-op, right? We give you a nice t-shirt, every year we have a barbecue, and then some of the responsibilities include $1,000 buy-in, and we have a meeting every day after work that you're not paid for, right? Those responsibilities are going to outweigh the benefits, and it's going to create an imbalance. So how do we make sure folks can access the benefits and that they're in balance with the responsibilities we're asking of them? The third area I'll take in pair would be the rights. This is the rights that every individual who starts a business is assuming they're going to have. The right to make decisions, right? Governance rights, key decisions that affect the company, to say what happens, and financial rights, the right to access surplus or profits from the company, right? To earn a financial return on their investment. So those are two basic rights folks enter into business with. And in a cooperative environment, we've got to design them, right? We've got to identify what key decisions through what process, right? What decision-making process are available for which stakeholders, right? You might have one class of member owners, perhaps you have multiple classes of member owners. So you're gonna have to think about how the key decisions are being made by each membership class. And for the financial rights, when do we distribute surplus profits, right? When do we earn a return as member owners, right? What are the conditions that allow that? So these are the two key things. And then finally, investment, right? How much money do we need to get started to be viable over the next year? And therefore, how much money do we need to raise from member owners versus other sources, right? And so it's important to think about how someone contributes their time, energy, money, and how that supports the functioning of the co-op. And being careful there, right? Sometimes capital can be coercive. That's one of the things we're trying to design against in the cooperative environment, right? We have a situation in the cooperative world where it's one member, one vote, regardless to how much money or anything like that is flowing into the co-op. We're creating a democratic environment where your capital, your amount of money that you're investing in, doesn't determine how much control you have. So it's important to consider all of these things. Let's look at an example. So we've got this coffee shop. This coffee shop, and they're going to be a cooperative. They exist to craft the highest quality coffee, roasted and brewed in the highest quality working conditions. So great quality coffee, great quality working conditions. That's their North Star. Who are their stakeholders? Their membership is open to current employees, right? So folks who work there get to be member owners. They're creating a pathway for them to become owners of this cooperative. Who are the non-owner stakeholders? Customers, suppliers, farmers, local partners, right? So people who buy the coffee, people who sell them coffee beans and cups and things like that, and other local partners, maybe local colleges that get discounts and things like that. And so for these guys, they're thinking of a three-person board, right? And they want to create the option for outside directors to come in as well. Maybe they want some accounting help. They're going to invite in someone with that expertise or some legal, or maybe they want to expand their coffee business, so they bring in other folks who know that business. So that's who they're relying on to guide themselves, right? Initially, their member owners, who would be current employees, are going to be the folks who make up the board, right? At least three of them. The next would be their benefits, right? So they decided that unlike existing employees who are not member owners are going to get higher salary, health insurance, time off, profit sharing, voting rights. So it's crystal clear to folks who work there why they should be a member, right? The meaning of membership, the value of membership. It's going to be economic, it's going to have social, and it's going to have just functional decision-making rights. Expectations, right? For them, they require an employee who wants to be a member to work 300 hours and to be endorsed by two members. Some folks have a buy-in, right? We're gonna say $1,000, if it's a small group of intimately connected folks, or maybe it's $100 if you're a food co-op and you've got 1,000 members, right? You choose the buy-in that supports your startup goals and that is appropriate for your membership design. So that's what they are requiring of their members, right? These are the expectations and the requirements. Then over to rights. They've decided members can run for the board, they can elect the board, they can approve bylaws, vote on issues, and engage in strategic planning. And they've decided this three-person board is responsible for approving the yearly budget and dividends and reviewing the general manager. The financial rights they have are around patronage, which is what you call the distribution of profit in a cooperative, right? It's based on patronizing the cooperative. If you're a worker cooperative, how much work did you put into the cooperative and the surplus it produces? If you're in a food co-op, how much did you consume, buy from that co-op? That determines your right to a return. So it's different in a cooperative and, interestingly so. So in this case, the dividends must be declared by the board and the dividends are allocated to current members according to proportion of hours worked. This is a worker co-op using time or hours worked is typical in that space. And then finally, investment, right? $12,000 in equipment, $24,000 for rent, $3,500 in legal fees. These are their startup costs, right? Almost $40,000. So they're going to be trying to raise however much of that 40,000 from their members, right? Maybe they think they can get half of it from members. They've got 10 members, so 20 members give $1,000 or whatever the case is, and we can get the other 20 from a bank or CDFI, like the cooperative fund, or maybe we do crowdfunding or grants or whatever the case is. So they've decided all of this. So I'm gonna take a pause here to see if there are any questions, and I'm gonna do a deep dive. I'm gonna invite up Carolyn to discuss her experience in coming into cooperative leadership and cultivating a sense of ownership and governance in the members of her cooperative. So, any questions before we move on? All right. Yes, let's spotlight Carolyn and myself. And I want to start the conversation with you describing the cooperative and the background that you were coming into with that cooperative.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. Hi, everybody. I'm Carolyn. I'm the program director for the learning team, along with Johan and Carla and Maggie. And I came to CFNE originally as a borrower. So in 2014, my coworkers and I at a yard and a half landscaping, a company outside of Boston, had the opportunity to buy out our boss when she retired. She had been running the company for about 25 years at that point, had built it up to a good value, had really invested a lot in making sure it had, good management systems, good procedures, a strong customer base, strong value proposition, all the things you want if you're going to buy a business. And we were hesitant. There were about 20 employees at that time, and we, talked amongst ourselves about, do we want to form a co-op and buy this business from her? And none of us had ever really seen ourselves running or leading a business, but we also had seen what happened to some of our competitors that had gotten bought up by big national companies, and we saw what happened to wages and working conditions and stuff like that. And we thought, well, okay, we've got a good thing going here. We have dignified jobs. We've got, decent for the industry wages. We're a bunch of mostly Latinos who know that the industry that we have expertise in can be pretty exploitive. And we have a good, safe place to work here. Let's give it a shot. So we spent about a year developing our bylaws, developing that entire, template that Johan just shared, and a bunch of other stuff, and put together the money to buy out our boss. CFNE was a significant portion of making that possible, both in terms of connecting us with the technical and legal expertise to put together a conversion, and also providing the financing for the buyout. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Well, thanks for that. So I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about that transition from being an employee to an employee owner or a member owner in a cooperative sense, because whether you're converting existing company, folks are there 20 years, they used to be an employee having a boss, or you're creating a new cooperative and folks have been in the workplace, other environments as an employee and not a boss. It's difficult to make that shift into being an owner. How do you cultivate that? What was your experience?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're right that in a conversion, it's more obvious because people have been working for someone else and all of a sudden they're owners. But I think, yeah, in our culture, we're used to bosses and ownership meaning a certain thing. And sometimes it's not that good what it means. And so I think for our group, one of the challenges was people had experiences with really bad experiences with bosses and really bad experiences with ownership. And we had to sort of get clear on how we were going to, we had to get clear on how we were going to treat each other and what rights did we have as owners and what rights did we not have? How is it different than being a sole owner in that you still have, accountability to the co-op, you still have responsibilities. You can't just make decisions on your own because you're one of 10, 20 owners. So doing that process of laying out those rights and responsibilities was really key for us. And then also sort of member development, thinking about what skills do we need to build to understand how the business runs, how it makes money, so that we as members could make good decisions together about that.
Were there any lids, so to speak, that you had to remove so that people could leap?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest lid is sort of cultural and psychological. I mentioned we were mostly Latino, a lot of folks from El Salvador and other places in Central America. And so culturally, there's a lot of deferring to authority and hierarchy, and also interpersonally. We had a hierarchy, we had a CEO and project managers and crew leaders, because to run a complex organization that's responding to weather and client demands and labor fluctuations, you need that. But at the same time, your crew leader does not have complete authority, and distinguishing between sort of what's management and operations and what's governance in the boardroom, we all are equals. So they don't have any different authority. It could be that I'm the guy cutting the grass and my crew leader can hold me accountable for how fast I'm working in the field. But when we're in the boardroom, I might be the board president, and I might be actually holding the CEO accountable for our financial results or whatever. So there was a lot of training about what's governance and what's management, and kind of reminding ourselves in the moment, what hat am I wearing right now? And encouraging each other, like, yeah, you have every right in the space of the board or the General Assembly with all of the members. Bring that question, raise that concern. That's your right and your responsibility.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that because a lot of the time when folks are coming to cooperative leadership or cooperative movement building, they're thinking hierarchy goes away, right? And I like to remind them that it's actually now fluid. It's not fixed anymore, right? The same person, same guy doesn't have the permanent control and loudest speakerphone. Now others can have their voice heard, and now we can all kind of speak together and not necessarily assume it's a fixed thing, it's a fluid thing. So I think that's really important. How did that continue to change over time especially as you were creating the container, the membership benefits and expectations? How did it move and change over time as you were trying to create a container for the member experience?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff stayed the way we set it up. I mean, the template that you showed for the coffee shop is like, it's pretty textbook because, well, it's a template. But we really did a lot of stuff that way, that we said, okay, we're a worker co-op, so our members, our primary beneficiaries, our primary participants are our employees. So yeah, we had designers who were really important in feeding us work. We had customers who wanted to keep happy, but we were clear that we weren't going to give them a membership stake. We invited them to provide feedback in other ways. We provided other benefits. But the membership really was for the workers. One of the changes that we had was initially we set our buy-in just based on how much member equity we needed to get the deal done. So there was a gap between, what CFNE could put in, what the selling owner could put in as a loan, and what we needed to make up. And we said, okay, here's the amount, here's how many of us there are, divide it out, and we came up with a $7,000 buy-in, which, in 2014 for a landscaper, that was really steep. And what we found as we were ready to bring on sort of our next cohort of new worker owners was that it was a barrier. And so we cut the buy-in amount in half. We, reimbursed all the existing members $3,500 and reset the buy-in price, because we wanted it to be like, yes, you need to have some meaningful financial stake, but it has to be doable. It has to be reasonable. So that was a change that we made. Another change in terms of sort of guidance and leadership was opening a couple of non-voting board seats for community supporters and clients. So we had, somebody who was an advisor in the construction industry who was able to sort of supplement, because we were really committed to having people on the board who were not management. We knew that there were certain aspects of sort of the business and financial skills that they might not have initially. And so we wanted to have somebody from the industry who didn't have any skin in the game in terms of the business, but really just wanted what was best for us. And also to have a client who could give us, feedback and hold us accountable in that way, again, without any voting rights. So those were, a couple of changes that we made early on in terms of rights and responsibilities and board composition.
Did you guys, now that everyone was, equal and feeling like member owners, have any issues kind of tamping or creating a space for more structure in that space?
Yeah, there's if anybody wants to check out the ownershiptransition.org website after this, is a really sweet video of our board president Yuri talking about his sort of transition or growth as a leader. And he makes this point. He's like, yeah, when we came in, we thought we were going to like stick it to the man. I'm going to be on the board. Nobody can tell me what to do. I'm going to be making all the rules. And that, eventually you realize like, no, it's not that way. You have a certain set of big picture things that you can do very slowly as a board member, but that day to day, management is management. And so I think there's like this period of disillusionment as people came onto the board or became members, where they thought it was going to be this radical change. And it's like, no, really, like the things that are there as your rights, those are the rights. You can vote for a seat on the board. You can run for the board. You can attend board meetings and, raise concerns. You get a share of patronage, but you don't get to like lord it over anybody. And then once people kind of settled into that, they realize like, oh, okay, it's, maybe it is that lid, that understanding of like, oh, okay, I don't want the headaches of going to all of the board meetings and committee meetings. I just want to be a member, but I know that that guy takes his job as a board member really seriously, and I can talk to him. If I don't like how something's going, or I feel like we're working too many hours or whatever, I can talk to him, and he has influence with management, and that's a way to get stuff done. And once people kind of understood the structure, they could decide for themselves, okay, do I want that direct involvement in running for the board or being an officer or being on a committee? Or do I basically want to just like be a member, have that little benefit and patronage, and, use the sort of chain of command to get my needs met?
Yeah, and I think that's really important because a lot of people are thinking about the rights that they're going to get, being an owner and being entitled to a financial return. And they're not necessarily thinking of the liabilities that come with that, right? Some are thinking, oh, I don't want to be involved in every decision, or, the other types of financial liabilities that could happen. Can you talk to that, and how do you help people step into the rights and recognize kind of the weight of the rights, the liability?
Yeah, it was funny when we were doing the conversion, in today, if it had happened, we would have been working with a co-op developer who would have set us up, I think, a lot better, honestly. But because we were Spanish speakers, because we didn't really have a budget to do the conversion with the developer for a variety of reasons, it was kind of an inside job. And the former owner and my co-CEO used to get really mad at me and be like, why are you scaring people? Why are you telling them like the bad stuff about ownership? And I was like, look it, you get a proportional share of the company's profit or loss. So you need to know that before you sign on the dotted line. And one of the things that's nice about having, 12 years of history behind us is that a lot of the things that can happen at a co-op have happened to a yard and a half over the years. And one of them was, okay, what happens when you have a bad year? So we had one year where, we had a bunch of years of like really nice patronage, around $10,000 per person getting allocated to that individual capital account. And then one year we had a loss. And okay, it has to come from somewhere. When you're accounting in the books, it has to come from somewhere. And so we looked at it and we were like, are we going to actually have to debit people's individual capital accounts by that amount of negative net profit? And luckily, because we built up a reserve, we didn't have to. We were able to use the collective reserve to resolve that. But it was a really good kind of wake up call for people. Like, things got really real. They were like, oh, that's what can happen. And also, the people who might have been disgruntled because what do you mean we can't just take all of the profit and divide up amongst the members? We have to put some in reserve. People who used to be disgruntled about that now are like, ah, I understand why we have an indivisible reserve. So it was, luckily a not too painful learning opportunity. But sometimes there are things that, are part of setting up good bylaws and good systems that you don't really appreciate them until a conflict or a problem happens. And then you're really glad that, you worked with somebody knowledgeable to advise you and put those things into your bylaws.
Yeah, you touched on this last thing. You touched on that collective reserves and, absorbing that as a whole rather than the individuals absorbing it. Has there ever been an occasion where an individual was able to put in more or had, kind of disproportionate power or investment? And, how did that affect things? Whether it was expertise or money or something else,
Mm-hmm.
how did
Yeah.
you deal with that? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, of course, there are a bunch of examples. We were not in a position, a lot of co-ops can address some of their capital challenges by having member loans in addition to your member buy-in. So, like in consumer co-ops and co-op groceries, it's really common to have your member share just costs $100 or $200, but often there's a member loan campaign when they're starting up precisely to get non-voting additional shares to help capitalize the co-op. We were landscapers. We could not do that, but we did get some, outside like loans from customers and community members who believed in what we were doing and were like, yeah, I don't need voting rights. I'm happy to just take a small percent of interest in exchange for this loan because I believe in you and want to see you succeed. So that was cool, when you were talking about sort of extractive capital. It's nice when things are aligned so that your investors, your lenders are like, no, I trust you, do the right thing, give me my interest, and we're good. One place that wasn't really as equal was, part of the reason CFNE exists is because it's very hard to get access to capital, access to lending as a co-op without individual people having to put themselves on the line with personal guarantees. And to a large extent, we used our line of credit with CFNE as a way to, when we needed to buy equipment or whatever, we would use the line of credit to do that and then sort of pay it down. But there were a couple of times where we had to get large equipment financing that somebody in the co-op had to put their name on it for a personal guarantee. The co-op still paid the bill every month, but the way we handled it was we sort of looked at like who in the co-op was bankable and then spread the risk around. So, I had a Bobcat in my name, somebody else had a truck in their name, somebody else had a, mini excavator in their name. Because you do what you have to, but it just sort of reinforces both the need for clear, governance that didn't give us any additional rights to decide what bills we paid in what order or anything like that. We had assumed a little bit of extra risk, but also the importance of having access to, community loan funds and other forms of capital that can work with co-ops and understand that personal guarantees they're not really appropriate. Because you can get into kind of a coercive situation where if some people have more risk, they might want more control. And that's not really, it's not really aligned with the model.
All right, excellent. Thank you. I think I'll cover some of these topics and then pass the mic to you to talk through some more of the nuance around co-op governance. All right. So if you guys have any questions, you can save them for the end or drop them in the chat as we go about, and maybe they'll be answered. So I'm going to just reaffirm some of these ideas that I really appreciated Carolyn sharing. Why co-op governance, right? Three big ideas that I heard and wanted to reaffirm. The first is hierarchy. Again, we come into the cooperative movement, the cooperative spaces thinking no more hierarchy, we're done with it, but it still exists, right? And it's just become a fluid thing. Once you understand that we are probably going to have separation of tasks, but we do not need fixed structures where some voices always matter and others don't, right? We recognize who our stakeholders are and we think about how to bring their voices into the decision-making process, right? So we allow fluidity in elevating voices and elevating people who have power and ultimately hierarchy, right? So recognizing that it's not about it disappearing fully, it's about recognizing that we can change it, it's malleable. So that's the first thing. And I think Carolyn's story talked about that well. The second is structurelessness, right? Some of us are coming out of a community space. We're all equal, we're all valued. And now we have to create an organization. And in that organization, we haven't determined decision-making processes, protocols, or recourse, right? We are sitting in the structurelessness. And for those of you who've ever been in a meeting and people are talking, and until one person speaks, nothing happens, right? That is the tyranny of structurelessness, right? There is a structure, it's just invisible. So the power is limited to those who know the rules, right? Whether it's a bylaw rule or an unspoken rule, there is a structure that is present, but making it visible helps other people to feel empowered and to participate. So it's not the case that we're just shifting out of structure into this beautiful free world of co-ops, right? We are now having to make these structures visible and to give everyone who's participating the ability to engage in decision making and in power. And the final thing is in concentrating power, right? Those of us who take power, that is an opportunity for personal growth and contribution, and it's a beautiful thing. But it could become toxic because we will often default to those who are giving up themselves, giving and taking power, right? The default practices of whether it's I have the most money or I have the most time, I'm running a meeting, now I'm taking the notes, I'm facilitating, all of that power is gladly offered by people who recognize, oh, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have the expertise. You do it. And so you start to accumulate more and more power, and that creates an imbalance, right? And so we want to pay attention to that. We want to design structures in our governance systems that account for concentrating power, whether it's capital, like Carolyn said, someone have to take a personal guarantee, and now they feel like they have more of a say. It may or may not be the case, but it happens. Other folks might defer to them as well. Well, they took such a big risk, make sure they're happy. So we want to think about how we're not designing our spaces and our structures to concentrate power where it already exists, right? We want to be able to share that power. We want to help other people get that knowledge. We want to create more opportunities for other to give and to offer what they have to the table. So these are really important. I want to reaffirm them. And I thought Carolyn's experiences really spoke to these. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Carolyn to talk a little bit more about what is this governance thing.
All righty. Thanks, Johan. All right. So, what is governance? Just get the technical definition out of the way. Governance is a system of rules, practices, policies that guide how a co-op is run, and it focuses on anything that affects the co-op as a whole in its future. So governance is big picture stuff. It's long-term stuff. It's about long-term oversight, sustainability, decision-making structures that ensure accountability to members' interests. So real quickly, either in the chat or just come off mute, who can think of some examples of governance decisions?
Whether to sell the business.
Whether to sell the business, that is the biggest, one of the biggest governance decisions. Yeah. And feel free to think about examples that are, in any of the co-op sectors. Could be worker, could be consumer,
Hiring and
producer.
firing.
Hiring and firing, unless you're talking about the general manager or the top
general
leader,
manager.
is
Yeah.
management. Exactly. Yeah. But yeah,
How decisions are made and who makes them.
again, at a certain level. Yeah. At the uh, there's a level of, of what goes in your bylaws that is what decisions are made and who makes them, that's governance. And then there's probably a management layer too, that's how much is a manager allowed to spend without authorization, et cetera, et cetera. So each level has a factor of that, but your bylaws definitely are the thing that sets up the template for who makes what big decisions and how. Great. So moving on to kind of where governance fits into all the decisions that are happening in the co-op. That was a great lead in. So in a co-op, you've got sort of three legs to the co-op stool. There's equitable shared ownership and financial participation. So we talked about that a little bit with the ownership model canvas. How are members participating at a base level as owners? There's governance by the members and for them. So one member, one share, one vote. That's really something that distinguishes co-ops from other forms of partnerships, in that in a co-op, no matter who you are, you're entitled to one vote, you own one share, as opposed to in other forms of partnership where the more shares you own, the more money you've put in, the more votes you get. So that one member, one share, one vote principle is really important. And then participatory and accountable management. And if you were here last month for the manager co-op session, management can mean really any structure that you're using to sort of manage effective daily operations, whether it's having a GM, having a leadership team, having sociocracy or member management. So, management really just means like the system, not necessarily a person. And, we got into this a little bit last month, but, just a quick review. Governance is about sort of big picture goals, strategy, high level policies, long-term planning, as well as kind of being the backstop for making sure the co-op is financially sustainable. So, what's called sort of fiduciary duty of making well thought out decisions in the best interests of the co-op. Management's more about the implementation side of things, operationalizing those policies and decisions and strategies. So day-to-day work and carrying out policies and setting short-term goals for, okay, to meet the budget the board set, what do we need to do this week, this month, this year to make that happen? And in a co-op, again, to review a little bit from last month, no matter what management structure you have, management doesn't sit at the top of the hierarchy. It's working in there with governance and with membership. So, you have the co-op members, they elect the board and hold them accountable for representing their interests. You have governance by a board that sets the big picture decision making and hires and holds accountable management. And you have management that's implementing the policies and the plans set by the board. And in a worker co-op, they're directly managing worker owners. So it's literally a circle. In a consumer co-op, they're interacting with and making sure that they're representing and serving customer interests. So it's a little less cyclical, but it's still more or less the same cycle. Also, when we were talking last month, even if you're a small co-op where everyone's wearing all of the hats, one person may be on the board, be a worker, be a manager, or serving in all of those roles. it's important to kind of keep clear. And, something I'd really advise as you're starting out in co-ops is just to like notice, which hat are we wearing? Which discussion are we having? So in the day-to-day, which is where we spend most of our time, is this sort of operational, like we're just doing the work. We might be thinking, how can we reduce production waste? It's really helpful to set aside time, whether it's once a week, once a month, once a quarter, to think about the management of your resources and your people. So, how many jobs do we need next month to meet budget? And then it's also helpful to set aside a different time, even if it's the same people making all the decisions, set aside a different time where we're focusing on strategy and policy and mission. So we might be asking at a monthly or quarterly board meeting, how much should we set aside for next year's equipment purchases? So those are sort of three different ways decision-making can operate at those different levels. So being a co-op member might mean you wear several hats, but, I was talking a little bit in my example about a yard and a half that being a member of a co-op is not the same as being sort of a sole business owner. So again, either in the chat or out loud, what sorts of things can you think of that aren't guaranteed when you're a co-op member that maybe people might expect from their experience of what ownership means in our cultural context?
Maybe making decisions unilaterally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're probably going to have to consult with some other people unless it's a pretty small decision. What else might be different about being a member of a co-op than being a sole proprietor? Okay, Richard, thanks for coming. And we'll send out a recording after if anybody has to jump. Okay, I'll go ahead and seed this with a few things. Being a co-op member doesn't mean freedom from consequences for poor performance. So we see a lot of owners of businesses doing shady things and commingling their personal finances with the business finances, not filing their taxes, all these sorts of things. In a co-op, there are systems of accountability, and as a member, you're responsible for both doing your job and doing whatever your role is in the co-op. The right to participate in every decision, as Kara said, and also access to sensitive information outside your role. So some co-ops might have a policy that they have like 100% wage transparency where everybody knows exactly what everybody makes. That's the exception rather than the rule. A lot of the times, the only people who have access to that level of information would be somebody who's like running payroll or a manager. But the co-op probably should have a policy that says, here's our wage scale for the year, here's how we benchmark and determine what fair wages are, here's our, ratio between maximum and minimum pay so that we know that our managers aren't making a lot more than frontline workers, et cetera. So there are a lot of things you don't get to do as a co-op member that you might get to do as a sole owner, but you still have some roles to play in co-op governance. And we kind of got to these through my example with a yard and a half. Voting and serving for the board, providing input on management decisions, the responsibility to stay informed about the co-op, and then that has sort of an inverse, which is that the co-op has a responsibility to provide you with education and training and information, and being able to vote directly on on issues that impact the co-op as a whole. So in a little bit, we'll look at kind of a decision-making matrix, and there is a set of decisions that are like so serious and so long-term and so impactful that all the members need to vote on and not just the board. And any decision that you're talking about, the question's going to come up, whether it's at the board level, at the management level. There's this question of who decides. So how do you decide who decides? in a co-op. And it always kind of comes down to balancing efficiency and like we need to make a lot of decisions every day, and some of them we need to make kind of fast, and the long-term effectiveness of the decision, that some decisions are really important and you want to have everybody involved. So these are sort of some questions you can ask in designing a decision-making structure for your co-op. Information. Do you need others' involvement because they have information that you, the decision maker, don't have, or there's information that's going to impact the quality of the decision? How significant is the decision? How much impact is it going to have on people and on a large group of people? How urgent is the decision? Is it something you need to decide quickly? That's going to be in tension with trying to get everybody involved. Resilience and durability. So if we got more people involved, would it result in a better decision? Because in the process of maybe taking a longer time to make a decision by consensus or by an integrative consent, we're actually building a better solution. And complexity, is the decision pretty complex, and where we actually want a lot of perspectives to make sure we're looking at it from all the different angles and getting all the different input. Regardless of where you fall on each of these decisions, there's kind of three ways to decide. I decide. This works if it's a simple decision and you've been delegated authority to make it and others won't be impacted by the outcome. You can decide and you can tell other people, hey, I made a decision. We're going to buy that brand of toilet paper because I'm the operations manager and I'm allowed to make that decision. And it doesn't really matter to you. Thinking about, can anybody come up with an example from your own workplace or even your own family of like, what's an example of a decision you can make on your own and why is that okay? You guys are a shy group today. I'm going to ask you again, so be thinking. Decisions can also be you decide. So someone else has the needed info and they're going to be more impacted by the outcome. And so we might delegate the decision to them. We might say, here's the scope of the decision. Here's the range of things from which you can choose, and you're responsible for the outcome. So what might be a decision that might be delegated where we're saying, maybe the co-op is saying, or you and your family are saying, you decide, that person decides. Okay, simple example in my family. I have a 15-year-old. When they registered for freshman year of high school, they got to choose a language for the first time. I was like, I got a preference that you learn Spanish, but ultimately you're going to have to be the one who goes to the classes and learns it and uses it. So I'm delegating that decision to you. You decide. You need to take a language. It's required by your school. You get to pick which one. The simple example, but I know that I'm not the most impacted. I'm not the one who has the most understanding of how it's going to impact them. So that's a decision I feel comfortable delegating. And then lastly, especially in a co-op, lots of decisions are we decide decisions. So lots of options for how we decide, and this gets into decision-making sort of process and structure. In the US, we do a lot of voting. That's our system that we use nationally. We're comfortable with it. It's zero sum, right? I mean, unless you do ranked choice voting, there's a winner and there's a loser, and we suck it up and we get behind whatever the winning decision is. Robert's rules, you'll see a lot in co-op bylaws that are sort of from a boilerplate template. It's a formalized process for bringing and debating motions. There's you have to have a second, so that makes it so that like maybe if something's coming up for a vote, it's a little more valid because at least one other person wants to vote for it. But it still comes down to a vote. And because it's sort of this complex procedural system, a lot of the times it benefits people who know how to play by those rules and have time to do some behind the scenes politicking. But despite all those things, a lot of times you'll see it in co-op bylaws as the way we're going to make decisions. FISTA 5 voting is sort of the next thing along the continuum from like voting to complete consensus. And it's got an element of voting in the sense that any number of fingers that you put up is a yes, but it is a little more like consensus or consent in that you get a sense of how much people are on board with the proposal. So, if I state a proposal and somebody is a 5, I know they're super behind it. They're ready to support it. They might even take some leadership in implementing it. If they're a 1, they're saying, I will go along with this, but I have some real concerns. I think I'm going to be negatively impacted, And so it can be really good, especially with working with groups that are learning how to make more collective decisions that are less zero sum. Because you have the option to so actually I used FISTA 5 in chairing a jury panel a couple of years ago, and it was really useful because it's like, okay, if there are lots of 1s and 2s, you're saying you'll go along with it because we need to give unanimous decision, but I want the group to hear from you about what your concerns are, and that was really helpful to kind of bring people in the group along. If they had just done the vote, it would have gone one way. But because we had a chance to expose some of those minority opinions, people actually said within the jury, like, thank you for holding up the process and making me think about it. I see it differently and I'm changing my vote. So FISTA 5 is kind of cool in that way as like a learning tool, as well as decision making. Consensus, you're probably familiar with. It's making decisions with the consent of everybody who's affected, and it really helps to bring marginalized voices to the forefront. But it takes a long time, and it helps to have people who are skilled facilitators. Otherwise, you can get into situations where one person is holding up consensus, and it can be challenging. And when we send out the deck, there are a couple of guides to consensus decision making that are short and easy to use that we'll share. Consensus -1 and supermajority backup are just backups to consensus to prevent that situation where you have one person who's a holdout who's like, I'm blocking this no matter what. I will not be reasoned with. I will not make alternate suggestions. And then integrative consent is the model that's often used in sociocracy, where you get to a decision that everybody can live with by people bringing concerns one at a time and sort of continuing to adapt the proposal iteratively until everybody says, yep, I can live with that. It's good enough to try. And the threshold for integrative consent is a little lower. It's good enough to try versus, yes, I can affirmatively agree to that. We talked a little bit in the who decides slide about getting clear on how important or how significant or how wide-reaching a decision is. And this extensiveness test is a way to decide, can something just be a management decision, or does it need to go to the board? So, some questions that you can ask to test for that are, does it affect a large number of co-op members? Does it commit a substantial amount of resources? So this is a reason why board usually has to approve new debt, because you're committing a lot of the co-op's resources over a long period of time. Does it affect the co-op operations, personnel, or resources over a long period of time? So again, co-op board is going to be the one making policy, because policy is going to impact people over a longer term than, this year, decisions about this year's salaries the GM can make, because it's a year, we'll have a do-over next year. But policies for what the max and minimum salary are going to be and what the ratio is, the board sets, because those have this iterative effect year over year, that some people are getting bigger raises than others, and that, difference between highest and lowest pay is getting bigger depending on what that policy is. And then there's also a question of what things does the whole membership need to decide? What things are such serious concerns that the whole membership, not just the board, should decide on them? So does it affect the survival of the co-op? Richard brought up, like, are we going to sell? That's a decision for all the members. Does it have to do with policies for hiring or terminating co-op members? That impacts everybody. So everybody should have a say in, are we changing the share price? Are we things are impacting members? And does it affect the basic character of the cooperative? So if at the top line of the business of the ownership model canvas, it has why the co-op exists. If a yard and a half decides that we're going to start making paletas instead of making popsicles, instead of doing landscaping, everybody needs to decide that. That's a major shift. So those are two ways to kind of get at who needs to be involved in what decisions. And you can sort of formalize that in a decision matrix. And after in the slides, we'll also share a link to ownership canvas that's got a decision matrix next to it. So as you're figuring out who has what governance rights and decision-making rights, you can actually put it in there. At a yard and a half, and also like most conversions that I've interacted with, we live and die by the decision matrix, because it's the only way to not fall back on habits of like, just let the GM decide everything. But it lays out, what are decisions all members need to be involved in, board decides, management decides, and maybe individual work teams or some other stakeholder group decides. And as you can see, basically, when we created this example, we looked at those tests from the last two slides. Electing the board. Is it going to impact the co-op over the long term? Does it affect all the members? Yes, members have to decide that. Changing the bylaws, board decision, but you have to consult with and get input from members and inform them about any changes. Creating the annual budget. Okay, management team is going to decide, but the board needs to ratify it. So management's closest to the information. They know what's realistic in terms of sales forecasts, how many staff, what they're paying people, blah, blah, blah. But they have to go back to the board and get approval, because your budget is, in a sense, committing all of the co-op's resources for the upcoming year. And then, selecting and purchasing job materials. It's a simple thing. We can set a policy for it. We can say can't exceed such and such budget. That's something that the work teams can decide on their own. They should consult with the project manager, the whoever in management, to set those limits. And the way that this is laid out, it's not going to work this way on everything, but the way this is laid out, the decisions that are sort of to the left side are governance decisions, and the ones that are sort of to the right side are management decisions. So I just threw a lot at you. I'm wondering if people have questions before we do a couple more things. Questions, comments? No? Okay. There's a wonderful document, the International Cooperative Alliance, which is it is what it is. It's the international body that determines kind of co-op standards and what it means to be a co-op and behave as a co-op. They are the ones who sort of publish the international co-op principles, and they have a guidance document that's like, here's what this means, here's how to think about it, here's some kind of details to consider. And on the principle of democratic member control, it has this comment: democratic process by itself does not guarantee competence. And I put this in here because the fifth co-op principle is education, information, and training. And what I have found both in my experience at a yard and a half and working with many other co-ops is if you don't, how to say this, governance is and member education are these types of reproductive work. They are not flashy, they are not highly visible, but if you do not have them, you will cease to function. So they're reproductive in the sense that they reproduce your culture and your ability to self-manage and sort of self-govern. And so if you're not investing in how do we educate members about what their rights and responsibilities are, how they get involved in governance, what governance is, how to run for the board, and then, holding elections and educating your board members and onboarding them to here's how to be a good board member. Here's how to read financial reports, whatever. Your co-op's going to revert back to that state of formlessness, and whoever has the most either social power or role power or just ego is going to be the one calling the shots. So everybody has the right and the responsibility to participate in governance. Everybody has the ability to, and they need the co-op to make sure that they're well, they have the capacity to do it through both education and information. Here's a bunch of tools that help you have a more democratic culture in your co-op, regardless of what type of co-op it is. Having regular, transparent elections, evaluating your governance periodically. Your board should sort of do a board audit, do a board self-evaluation, making sure your governance body represents all members. So I see food co-ops struggling with this a lot, of getting members involved and actually knowing when there's an election coming up, who the slate of candidates is, and feeling like that's something that's important for them to weigh in on, that's a responsibility of membership. And term limits to make sure that leadership doesn't get concentrated in the people who are like really good at and comfortable with governance and like, oh, I know how this board thing runs, I'm just going to stay here and hang out forever. Sharing information. So having predictable and timely and available agendas that, if we want members to weigh in and use their board as the way that they get their needs met, then we have to let them know what we're up to. So making sure the agenda is available ahead of time lets the board members prepare and, read any information, but also lets all the co-op members see, oh, they're going to have a discussion about patronage allocations. I want to put my 2 cents in on that. And then also information sharing in the forms of training and accessible training. Most people, if you give them a 7-page long profit and loss statement, are going to be like, but you can, turn that into a 6-line profit and loss statement with some nice charts and a nice narrative and make that more accessible. You can play games with people to help them learn how different parts of the co-op function. You can create dashboards that let people at a glance tell how the co-op's doing on its, key performance indicators. And then providing ongoing membership education. We kind of talked about this a lot, but particularly to make sure that people have an equitable opportunity to participate. We really need to be educating them about and checking in and like supporting them in exercising their rights and responsibilities. Doing skill inventories. You don't know what somebody knows how to do if you don't ask. And especially in, I was going to say especially in worker co-ops, but in any co-op, you're probably not going to know that you have a member who's a marketing whiz or a great public speaker or loves asking people for money if you don't ask. And training and mentorship opportunities, building those in and having a system for them so people don't have to, make it up for themselves to learn the skills that they need to be a good engaged member or board member. So sort of closing ask to you is, what would be empowering for your members, managers, and board members or directors? And how do you help them leap beyond the lid? Johan, can I pass it back to you to take us out?
Yeah, yeah. I think the question just asks you to think about how do you intentionally design a governance experience that empowers ownership and not just membership, right? We want folks to feel as though they're a part of something they helped create it, and from generation to generation, they can manage this thing, right? This co-op together. So we have resources that you guys can take advantage of, and you will get this full slide deck in an email that follows up with this conversation. We've got the co-op design canvas in there. We've got the ownership model canvas, business model canvas, some of the tools that we've used to discuss these concepts. And if you ever need to, you can reach out to us even after the course. You can use this link or use an email to schedule a call, and we can help you think through your next steps on your co-op journey. So thank you for joining us. I think that's good. I think that's good. Any questions you guys have us for another 8 minutes, or you can reach out anytime if you do. All
This has
right,
been great. Thank you so much, everyone.
no problem. Thank you guys.
Thank you for joining.
All right, take care.